Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about the Rect transform on elements on the Unity user interface. So to get started, I'm just going to quickly create an image like what we had in the last video, and as I create an image you're going to see we've got the Rect transform up here in the inspector. Now let's go through each thing in here and we'll just talk about what everything does and how it all works. So the Rect transform is basically every setting you need to customize the display of a UI and element. So basically every user interface element will have one of these, and they allow you to customize the position, width, height, rotation, scale, all that good stuff of the element. So let's start with the position. This is quite an easy one. So let me just drag our thing into the center here. You'll see our position is 0, 0, 0. If we change the X, you can see we can customize how far along the x-axis it is. So let's say we made that 100 and then the y we put to 50. The image is going to be 100 along the x, 100 pixels, and 50 on the y from the center of the screen. And we'll talk about why it's the center in a minute and how we can change that. The Z position, that won't actually do anything if your canvas is in a screen space overlay. If we work in a 3D space, you can see that as we change the Z position, it's going back and forward. But we can just keep that at 0 because it doesn't matter too much in a 2D space. So let me set that back to 0 and 0, and let's talk about why it's going from the middle center. So to do this, we're going to talk about something called anchors. Now you'll see we've got this little square here where it says middle and center, and if we hit on this, we get loads of different anchor presets. We have left, center, right, and bottom, middle, top. We can click any one of these and it's going to set the anchor position to where we've clicked. Now, what is an anchor? Well, an anchor is the point at which an element is referenced when changing the position relative to its own parent. So that might sound a bit confusing, but let me explain simpler. So let me set this to the middle again. We set it back to 0, 0 and make this image a little bit larger and change the color to maybe a light red, pinky red, and we'll just drag this to the center of the screen. If we then duplicate this image and drag this new image inside of the other one and make this maybe a light blue, and we'll just change the width and height just so it's a bit smaller, you'll see that now if we make the center top left on the anchor preset, you'll see as we change it, so let's go to 0, 0, you'll see the center of this image goes to the top left of its parent. Now you're probably thinking, why is the center of this and why is it not the top left going to the top left? Well, that's where pivots come into play. We can play around with pivots of an element to change where the center is of that element. For example, if we quickly go top left here, you'll see where we've got center, we're going to change that to pivot. If we now change the pivot and make that 0, 0, you're going to see the pivot on this image here is bottom left, and we want to make it top left, so if we make it 0, 1, it's going to be top. And now if we set that to 0, 0, you'll see the top corner is aligned with the top here. So what is the pivot? Well, the pivot indicates the reference point for positioning, rotating, and scaling a game object. Now, I know that sounds a bit confusing. We've had to change to the pivot view, the pivot tool up here, and not the center. If we go to center, the pivot will not matter, and it's always going to play around with the center. If we leave it at pivot, everything's going to do change relative to the pivot of each element. So if we were to rotate this as well, it's going to rotate around the pivot point, which in our case is top left. We can change the pivot here in the inspector, maybe make it 0.3, 0.2, and now you're going to have a bit of a random pivot, but it's going to rotate around the pivot. Same as it will move around the pivot, everything like that. Anyway, back to this original image here. If we set the anchor position to the top left, that means our position is always going to be relative to the top left. So if we set this to 0, 0, you'll see the center, the pivot is locking to the top left of its parent, which is the canvas. Now what if we want an easy way of setting the pivot to the anchor position? Let's say, for example, our pivot is going to be the middle right. That's a bit more of an awkward pivot to set on here because we want this thing, sorry, let me go back into pivot mode. We want this blue circle to be here. And we could just set it to 0.5 in the property in the inspector. But what if we didn't want to mess around with that? Well, what we could do is, when we click this, if we hold shift, you'll see while selecting these, you'll see we get loads of different blue dots, and these also set the pivot position. So if we now click this right one, it's going to set the pivot of our thing to the right and the anchor position to the far right as well. So for example, let's go for the middle top, the center top, sorry. We're going to hold shift, the pivot has been set to the top, and the anchor point has been set to the top as well. Now if we hold Alt, it's going to move it to that position for us automatically. And we can also hold Alt and Shift at the same time. So for example, if we hold Shift and Alt and click bottom right, the pivot of this image is going to go to the bottom right. The anchor point is going to go to the bottom right of the canvas, and the position is going to go to the bottom right. So let's try that out. So Shift, Alt and bottom right, and everything's gone to the bottom right. And as you can see, because the pivot is lined up with the anchor point, the position 0, 0 does actually correspond to the bottom right of the screen. And now everything we do is that far away, these many pixels away from the anchor point. So that's the anchor presets and the pivot and the position all dealt with. Let's talk about the second easiest thing. Let me set this back to the center. Width and height. Width is your width of it, so let's go for like 1000 is going to be quite long, and your height, let's maybe set that to 500. You see we've got a height of a larger rectangle. That is all your width and height is. Very simple stuff. The width and the height of the object, probably the simplest thing going. Let me set that to, say, let me go to 250 by 100. Actually, I'll just make it larger myself and set that to the middle. Rotation, that's self-explanatory, so that's the amount you're rotating by X. If we were to bring this out to 3D quickly, X is going along sort of, so 90 degrees would be flat, which means you'd have an infinitesimally small view here, so you wouldn't see a thing. The Y rotation is rotating it on the Y. So once again, doesn't do much, it's just changing the width. If in 3 dimensions, of course, it's changing quite a bit. But if we're viewing this from a 2-dimensional perspective, it's not doing a lot. Z is the one we care about. That is your left and right, your clockwise and anti-clockwise. This is the one that's like you're probably going to end up using the most in 2 dimensions, of course. And your scale. So as you see, your X is how much scale it is on the X position. So what I mean by scale, a scale of 1, 1, 1. The width and height is multiplied by the scale. So if we have 2, the width here is 650, multiplied, if the scale on the X is 2, the width is going to be 1300, because it's just multiplying that by. So if we were to set this to 1300, and then put the scale back to 1, it's the exact same as a scale of 2 on the X and 650. And yeah, we just don't need to worry about the Z because it's 2-dimensional, it's infinitely flat. So no amount of Z is going to make it thicker. And there's this little link button here, enable constrained proportions. So if we enable that, what that's going to do is if we change one, it's going to change the other proportionally. And that's it. And that is all there is to this. Need any more help with this, please do ask questions in the comments, but that is everything you really need to know about this. There's a couple of buttons here, blueprint mode, and you've also got raw edit mode, but we're not going to go into those today. You can play around with those in your own time. We've got some presets here. I'm not going to worry about these either. You got presets for everything, but under these 3 dots you can reset the component back to default. And yeah, that's all I've really got to show you in this video. So I just thought we would cover this because it's in literally every UI element we are going to use. So it's probably best that you know what it is. But now you do know, so thanks for watching everyone. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video, where we are going to cover text. So see you then everyone, goodbye.